It seems that nations and tribes have always invaded other nations and tribes. And what I'm going to try to do is compress a resource-based economy into just a few words. And if you have difficulty understanding this, you probably won't be able to put it together. Since all tribes have been invading other tribes, more or less, most of them have, then it seems that war is a process for gathering resources. And if you keep losing thousands of people in a war to maintain your resources, and wars seem to occur almost continuously, you're losing your best people. And it would seem to me that nations should not have difficulty grasping the fact that the answer lies in sharing the Earth's resources rather than keep taking away resources from others. And all that the Venus Project proposes is that we share the Earth's resources and give up this idea of war. It's really, in the long run, you still have your kids. Your buildings aren't blown up. And the losses are so tremendous. And this is, in a nutshell, what the Venus Project is about. I'm going to simplify it again. Most nations took land away from other nations, or their sheep, or their buildings, or their women. A resource-based economy is making all things available to all the world's people. It seems to me that if they don't do that, they will continue along the same lines. So if you want to discuss a resource-based economy in just a minute, you can do it that way. If they don't understand that nations have taken things from other nations, they won't grasp it. If they don't understand that, get your history books out and read it, and that's what you'll find. I'm leaving out Sunny Day in May. I'm leaving out all the propaganda. Now, also along with that, if you're interested in more detail, it seems that patriotism and loyalty to country is a quick system for getting people in line. All you have to say is God, country, and America. Those few words will line up people. If you can condition people to respond to just a few words, you can get them to line up and obey you. As I see in Dracula films, Count Dracula says, "Obey me." He always says, "Obey me." And that's what nations do. They want their populace to obey them. And the simplest way to do it is to say, God's on our side, or this is the greatest country in the world. A few of those things. Whereas in the Venus Project, we understand the history of war, why it comes into existence, the factors that shape human values, and the reason for nations demanding simplicity. Without simplicity, it'd be difficult to control people. So simplicity is God's on our side. If you love America, you'll sacrifice yourself for this country and its future. And so those simple statements like that, in France they call it hoopla, or they also call it thought control. Thought control is when people can be conditioned to respond to symbols fast, but intellect is difficult. If you let people go off and think about things, they want to know a lot of questions, they want to have answers, so they say, people are jealous of our way of life, and they would like to take our resources away from us. I would see no reason offhand for any nation backing away from a resource-based economy, because the sharing is immediate. Now, if a nation doesn't have resources, or much resources, I would say that maybe Sweden has a lot of technicians they can lend to undeveloped nations. and the undeveloped nations may have resources. But the undeveloped nations may not have the technical skill to develop their resources. So when I say sharing of resources, that means personnel, equipment, factories. If the United States has most of the world's factories, we would like to distribute factories different places so we don't have to ship stuff great distances. And all I wanted to say is that's essentially what it's about. All your laws and everything else are made about maintaining our position of advantage. That's what all the laws are about. All the laws man-made in a court of law or by lawyers are to maintain this system. The laws do not call for sharing with other nations because we feel we're in a position of advantage and we can demand more for less. We don't have to put out much. China will turn out lots and lots of skirts and socks and neckties and clothing for a much lower price than we can because they have an overpopulation and they need our purchasing power, or they need objects in this country. Buying objects in this country is really too expensive for China. So China will have to make its own automobiles and its own vacuum cleaners at a price the Chinese people can afford when they're ready for it. But if you continue along these lines, the most powerful nation will use their leverage to either dominate other nations, and if they work for less, they needn't invade the nation. They can still maintain their position of advantage by paying less for services. So I'm saying this, finally, that if we really want to save our people and cities from utter destruction and the earth from nuclear dust and all the other pollutants that we've come up with, we must somehow learn how to bridge the difference between nations without any nation maintaining overview. Or it wouldn't be the United States that would be telling them what to do. It would be a joint venture understood by all nations, the sharing of resources. Now that can't be accomplished equally because we have better transportation in America, and therefore we will have to share some of our transportation with countries that don't have the means, the railways or the highways. Do you understand that? We will have to develop other countries so they can transport goods and services. We would have to develop hospital systems. In other words, if you make a hospital system to handle the dominant disorders in different countries. Do you understand? There are physical disorders in different countries. In America, you have a lot of psychological disorders. In Spain, you might or might not have as many. So your hospitals should be designed for the dominant disorders in the area. But the hospitals have to be prefabricated and well equipped with everything any other hospital has. If you don't do that, you're going to set up disruptions. So you will also have to explain to their doctors what they need, ask them what they need, and what they would need to fulfill their practices. And that goes for, we will teach them, or they will teach us, what the best industrial process is for growing food. Others with a very low crime rate will tell us what they do. So by sharing ideas, we can almost eliminate all crimes if we share resources equally, not some resources for some countries. Now, countries that do not join with us, which there will not be part of that system. And we feel that if they don't want to join us, in time they will be pressed to join us. So when I say that, I mean the standard of living of the countries that join us will be higher than those that do not. And so that's it. That's what I have to say. Now you can use that to describe a resource-based economy fast. And they say, well, what if somebody wants to invade our country? What do you do if you don't have armies and navies? We don't dispel with armies and navies until we have the basis of a resource-based economy. Because people would like to come here and take everything away if we dissolve our armies and navies. So we have to have many of the number one nations that join us, possibly France, England, Germany, will probably join us, because the advantages are enormous. And they have countries will undergo a time of less extravagance, only during the transition. Then we will turn out lots of products and make sure that there's more than enough. So I would imagine that no country would try to invade us if we had the major nations in, and we maintain our military until this is worked out. Otherwise, if you just gave up everything, you might be invaded by China or North Korea or some other country. Do you understand that? I don't like the idea of keeping a military, but I don't know how else to deal with it during the transition. And during the transition, there will be prisons, police, because you have to do that until you get stabilized. Because people have so many different values, you cannot reach, with present-day language, all nations. But you might be able to reach them with film, showing them the kind of buildings they live in, water access, access to food, and the concept of the library spread throughout. The library is the easiest way. You can say, although books are available, everybody accepts a library. Then you can say musical instruments are available, cameras are available, lawnmowers are available at the centers of distribution. So you'll have to show them why you're doing that, because you have to pay insurance against theft. Now you also have to pay a fee to have cameras, heat sensors, gas warnings in your house. You pay a company for protection. And when you add up all that money that the middle class and the wealthy have to pay to put bars on their windows, guards, insurance, that's billions of dollars. We can take care of poverty that way. There's no poverty. Now, people that are disadvantaged in the system during the transition will have a somewhat harder time. I can't control that. Once we establish things, the physically ill will be maintained and cared for without filling out any forms. They go right to the center. When they need treatment, they're examined and helped. But they don't fill out forms. The only time you have to wait is during the transition, as we prefabricate hospitals rather than build them. Prefabricate means you can get them up faster. We might even have temporary hospitals inflated, where you inflate a kind of a dome, like 40 feet in diameter, for medical treatment. You know, while the hospitals are being built. I'm not saying that people sit around waiting till we build a hospital. Do you understand? Inflatable structures with steel bands in it, so it only goes up to a certain size. The inflatable structures also have water accommodations, food accommodations, whatever is needed in a hospital. That's a temporary structure during the transition. And during the transition, people that have volunteered will be assigned tasks. If you're a registered nurse, you can assist doctors. But if you're not a nurse, if you're interested, you can assist nurses. They will tell you what to do. Change the bedding. A lot of people can do that, where nurses don't have to use their valuable time changing the bedding. When people don't know. Until we develop beds with a sheet that rolls under and is cleaned. And the center of the bed has an insert made of foam on top and rubber. It's soft. can pull out if a person has to defecate, to take him out of bed and walk him to the washroom. You pull out the center of the bed, which is tapered unit. Do you understand that? Or you have difficulty with that? So they can defecate or urinate in bed. Now the beds, of course, are not present-day type equipment. We will standardize hospitals. We will standardize surgical equipment, update it, and then standardize it until we can get to newer developments. Now, you can't change every hospital because you find a new way of doing things. The survey committee will tell us the optimal time is 2 years between changing buildings. They will tell us that. You can't change it every week. You come up with a new idea. So all that's based on studies and surveys. There'll be no country left out because it's poor, or later we will build hospitals. Inflatable structures will be used during the transition. I hope that's clear. We will, of course, utilize ships today for delivering goods and services while we work on an oceanic transportation system. So all ships become standardized. And all these different ships are different size, built by different shipyards. You could never take care of the world needs. But during the transition, all those ships, assuming, will have very slow orders and very few customers. If the banks break down and everything else, so the ships will be utilized by all the different nations for transporting buildings that can be inflated and other things needed in the undeveloped countries. Is that clear? Do you have any questions? The decisions are made by the survey committee. They tell us how much we need for each area, how large the water tanks have to be. Then the survey committee will tell us how deep you have to drill for water in different areas. So all that equipment will be based on surveys instead of just going drilling for water, So the survey committee has full authority, on telling us there's no reason for them to cheat or lie. They don't get paid, there's no gain. Like I can't say, I'll get a hospital built in Venezuela, because all the surgical equipment is made for the use of all people. That's why we do surveys. We do surveys to maintain this equality. Again, during the transition, there will be problems. And that's it, I think.
You mentioned that during the transition there'll still be prisons and the military. Will they act different?
We'd have to have it.
Will they have the same standards as today, or will they be a little different?
Well, they'll be uniformly protecting 30 nations or 20, the amount that join us. It will be a kind of an international protection group during the transition. It won't be U.S. Army, the French Army, the German Army. It will be defense system for defending the transition. Is that clear? I don't want American navies and French navies. They will have to be under the coordination of the protection of the new development system. Nobody's going to be shot or unless they try to invade. I can't see why they would invade if the major nations joined. They'd have tremendous fear of trying to take over. And they would only want to do that if they're not being fed. So all things like oatmeal and packaged foods will be made available during the transition. They'll be told that we will not have a wide variety of food until the first 3 years. They'd have to bear with it till we get all these things in order. But with airplanes today, we can drop surgical instruments anywhere in the world fast. Do you understand? And with boats, we can deliver goods faster than we could have in the past In the past, it might take a month to go around the Cape with a ship and bring food to an undeveloped country. Today, we can do that faster. So I would say this is about the best time for social transition. If we fail to do that and just take care of few countries, we will create new problems. Like if 3 countries join together, they say, well, the hell with the others, they didn't join. There'll be problems. We have to feed them, take care of them, educate them, show them the new techniques for farming and agriculture, everybody. So there'll be a standard practice in Latin America for growing food. Standard practice, meaning agronomists and agriculturists will tell of their methods and share them with other people, because there's no advantage in keeping it to yourself anymore. Otherwise you won't get the surgical instruments and everything else. And you won't get the medical care unless you share with everybody, everything. A guy said, well, would I have to give up my home? Well, during the transition you're going to live in your home. But after the transition, the cities are built. We build a city, then we level a city of 50,000 and move them into that city after the planning system. We never level cities and then start building a new city. We build a new city, level the old ones, and mine them for glass, structural steel, or whatever we can use. Is that clear? Highways are no longer built with curves towards certain land. They go straight through to California. Highways and trains and railways. I think I told some of you about the Coriolis effect. Since the Earth turns in a given direction, the railroad tracks running from New York to California wear out on one side due to the rotation of the Earth. It puts a train load on one track, so they tilted the tracks to allow for the Coriolis effect, so they wear out equally. Well, a lot of the scientific applications will be applied by the Bureau in charge of conservation of forest and energy. They will determine, because they have access to every patent now, and they can, I don't like to use the word seize the patent. Since everybody is one now, there need not be any reason for you to keep ideas to yourself, because inventors and artists are all taken care of, but they're assigned projects. You don't work on a new toothbrush unless the world's people need a new toothbrush. You're assigned what is needed. You're assigned growing watermelons or grapefruit depending on what is needed nutritionally. The nutritional department decides on what is grown. Do you understand that? After you do a survey of physical lack, whatever you lack, certain vitamins and all, that's done by the survey and medical health department. When I say medical, I'm talking about all different systems, from naturalists, doctors that use natural methods, we would eventually collect data and know which portion of the system is to be used. Like in many metaphysical approaches to health, a lot of it is not valid. And many medical practices are not valid. They're done because it's good business. Doctors replace the hip when it's slightly worn, and then the hip prosthesis doesn't fit too well. So I would say much more careful studies are made before any transplants are made. Do you understand that? And all emergency people very sick will be given priorities. There's no methods of giving Spanish or Greek people or Americans priority. The priorities are for all people. But all people are not trained in the same way. So nurses will be transported greater distances to foreign countries If we have a surplus of nurses in China, they'll be transported. If Cuba has a surplus, those countries will remain until we go into geographical distribution of the population. We don't take people and move them places. We say, how many people like the tropics? How many people like winters and change of season? And after that survey, we know the majority of people want to live in the temperate zone, not necessarily the tropics. Do you understand? So we don't just take people and move them different places. We do a survey first, find out what people want, not what they want, what they ought to want. They're trained in knowing that certain types of combinations of food, artificial coloring are no longer used. That pigs are no longer accelerated in growth. They're not fed growth hormone to speed up the development. So you got a fat pig, you can bring it to market sooner. Well, the acceleration of cells in the pig may affect the acceleration of cells in the human. So very careful studies are made. We're not interested in growing fat pigs fast unless just simple nutrition does it. Because pigs and other animals have lived on certain nutrition for hundreds and hundreds of centuries. If you suddenly change that, it's going to have a lot of detrimental effects on animals. Because we can't change what nature has proven over thousands or millions of years. You can't suddenly give people pills that contain everything they need. They need bulk too. You understand? I just want to make sure you understand that there's no advantage taken of anybody. Any questions about that? The only reason I mention defense is that some nations will try to take it away because they're having immediate problems. But we will immediate supply whatever we can to all nations.
What would go on in prisons? Would there be more education, access to information?
Well, there wouldn't be prisons. There'd be like schools where people might be sent to see films on the factors that shape human behavior. Why a person beats another person. And why a person uses physical force. They'll have to attend those films. And then after the films they discuss it. And will it affect everybody? No. But it'll affect enough people. We don't need to affect everybody. We need to affect mainly the survey committee and the people that design the transportation and all that. Those are the major people. Now, anybody can become a major person, but they don't have a higher standard of living. They all have a very high standard of living. They have access. Now, the average person will not access books on the nature of material resources. Certain people will. The average person doesn't care about those things. So you say, well, the average person never access medical history. No, they don't want it. Until they're educated as generalists, then they will access different kinds of books. But during the transition, the books that will be accessed is where to get food, what to do about certain physical disorders, where to go, the things they need now, where they're at now. You can't put books in libraries or DVDs that give them information that they have no idea about. You know, people are not going to look up the history of shape memory alloys. Certain people will, and compile that for others that are into that. But later on, most people will be into most things. But you don't need to do that right away. You do it on the basis of survey. I hope you know what that means. Survey, do you? The survey committee has no axe to grind. They just don't know which trees give out most oxygen, which trees are the most valuable to grow on this soil. They're sent to soil, and we ask them, what is the best thing to grow on that soil? Do they know all the answers? No. They know more of the answers than the average person, that's all. We don't bury animals or people in a graveyard, because if you statistically figure that out, sooner or later the whole earth will be a graveyard if you bury people. And I imagine there must be millions of acres that are devoted to graveyards. And I believe that everybody wants to survive, but they're not well enough informed. They still think the Jews, for example, are not allowed to have their bodies autopsied. Did you know that? You have to bury the guy whole, because when he gets to heaven he might have a missing part if you transfer the organs.
As long as it's his foreskin, they'll be all right.
The foreskin? Well, God will take care of that. In other words, here you're dealing with some cannibals, and you're dealing with poorly informed people and misinformed people, and so that's why you can't have equal participation. If a person said to me, I want equal participation, I says, report to surgery in the morning, you can do an operation on the brain. Well, I don't know anything. Then you can't have equal participation. Do you know what I mean? If a person says to me, will we have equal participation in the new society? Well, you can work on the new design of an airplane. Do you know how? No. How can you have equal participation? You can have equal opportunity to go to school and become whatever you want to become. That will be available. But you can't have equal participation. Will some small Latin American country decide the music for the world? You're going to listen to Greek music because it's equal participation? You're going to listen to the music you like. You can't have, is that clear? You can't have equal participation unless you're equal to the task. Do you know what that means? Trained to do so. So.
Can you go into that a little more for
yes.
the listeners?
Okay. If a person comes into the picture and they study agronomy, growing of all kinds of plants, and become very familiar with that, they will teach that subject. And then the person that can pass the test, meaning knowing what that subject means, will instruct others. But if a person works on his own and finds out that there's a certain food that contains everything people need, he can submit it to the computer, and the computer will say, we would like to do further studies on that. And it will alert the labs to do studies on the Larry's new fruit that contains everything. They do studies on it, and it becomes implemented if it works. Do you understand? The establishment does not control food. They do only during the transition and the early stages. But if you come up with a new therapy, if you find out wearing a craniopathy works, moving the cranial case, it'll be used if it works. But the studies made are done by scientists that have pledged, that have no particular allegiance, but just to find out if the system works. They don't have money in any corporations, the scientists. They don't have investments to make it want to work. Use our carburetors, because I invented it, and he invested in it, so he can impress the direction. There seems to be no way in the resource-based economy of putting your favorite foot forward and controlling that society. There's no reason to fake anything, because no one is given credit. In other words, if you come up with a cure for cancer, they say this is how the Larry system works, see? And they tell it to everybody. But Larry goes around lecturing on it, but he doesn't get a medal. You know what I mean? But you can only do that under a resource-based economy. It won't work if you try it under another system, because if you come up with a contradiction to the corporation you work for, they'll can you. Why should if you become what do they call it? Whistleblower. You know what a whistleblower is? Like we just heard recently on Free Speech TV, that there were many American nuclear plants that began to leak and do many things that were never reported. Because the government owns the nuclear plants. They're not private corporations. So the government has to protect the people that designed it. Otherwise people would lose confidence in the government faster. So you got to understand, since there's no vested interest, there's no reason for corruption. The only kind of corruption that might exist are mental disorders. And that can be detected real early. You don't need to wait till the guy is going around blowing up buildings. There's earlier evidence that manifests itself. Do you know what I mean? Nobody comes into work, they get a little fever, and they're checked out, and they're told they have scarlet fever, and they're isolated, and the rest of it with tuberculosis. That would be isolation wards. In the isolation ward, meaning where contagious diseases can be spread, there is a battery of what looks like fluorescent tubes, so long, and all of the air is drawn through that, and it's radiated with ultraviolet light, which kills all airborne bacteria. Now, if we find that a certain amount of bacteria should be available to build up antibodies, you know what I mean? If you're brought up in a sterile environment, you'd be super healthy, but if you go outdoors, you get infected right away. So you need antibodies. How do you get antibodies? I have a little bit of this bacteria, a little bit of that. So that would also be determined by the health survey. But do you understand that? There's nobody sitting down making decisions based on the past. Everything is rechecked again and again. And we have, let's say we have a medical group do a survey. That medical group might have a bias which they inherited from an earlier culture. You know what I mean? So we have 3 medical groups doing a survey. They don't even know of each other. And if all the results come out the same, it means that it's not based on carryovers. Do you think you know what I'm saying? There are ways of preventing preferential behavior. Okay? Now, if one kid seems to learn faster than other kids, he becomes an aid in teaching other kids in his class. You know what I mean? Instead of using that, I got an A, you got a B, he got a D, she got an F, failure. See, that's not good. That produces attitudes in people. But if you've got a very excellent sense of balance, but your heart is not as strong, we are interested in the genetics that gives you a sense of balance. You know what I mean? So genetic engineering will not be used to grossly change people, only if certain things are lacking in your body and you can't, say as you get older today, you lose your memory. You can't recall everything you could years ago. So if a guy finds out that genetic splicing will improve that, they test it on animals and give them a memory test, going through a maze or whatever it is. And if there's a high correlation and it's not fully tested, we say you're losing your memory, we can use this now, it'll help you. We don't know the final results. So you will always volunteer or reject it. You don't have to undergo certain experiments. And there are ways we can sit down and discuss and prevent bias. Do you understand what I mean? Bias means if you come from an Indian village, you might think that the Indians have a certain unique way of looking at life. And if they do, we apply it. If it works, we use it. We don't only use orthodox methods. We use whatever methods work. Okay? Your qualifications are based on the results. If you can help more people than System B, that system has priority if it works. And it has priority until another system comes along, or a modification of the system. Is that clear? This is how you can be fair. I don't know how else to be fair about things. If you can think of some other problem, bring it up. Because that's what the transition's about. Bringing up things that we don't seem to be able to solve. There may be a time during the transition where we don't have enough information to make a decision. So we put out further information is needed. And 9 or 1,000 labs are working on that now. We haven't got the results. We won't get it until the next month or so. But you tell the public where you're at. The whole system is really transparent because the public knows in lay language just what's being done. Now, if people need a church to feel good during the transition, we will build a church, but they don't pay taxes and they don't have to pay for the building. We've turned out prefabricated churches of a standard size. But if more people follow a particular church, we use that. But the church has films on the history of invention and how churches use, I don't know if you know this, there are bells in churches that are hi-fi. They're not real bells, but they make a hi-fi recording. Boom, resonance and all. So when you hear, the guy used to pull a string to move the bells in the church. They have hi-fi church. They have electric lighting in churches. They don't ask God to illuminate the church. They do use air conditioning. You know what I mean? So it is easier today to turn a church around. That is a modern church with all the equipment. Okay? Now the ministers themselves will be advised to attend a filming on changing human values over a period of time. And the minister, the way that film's arranged, will realize that he himself has preferential values due to his conditioning. And they will use words like conditioning. And once they understand conditioning, they can't judge a person as being a criminal or bad. So the sermon will begin to change. Do you understand what I'm saying? There are sermons in church today, like the Unitarians, that talk more about the physical world, and practically nothing, but they still sing hymns. They couldn't quite let go of religion. So they walk down the aisle, and that's the humanists too. Humanists have similar problems. The humanists believe that if you had a machine government, people would become more like machines. But they don't understand that people are machines. They're different chemical, electrical, biological machines. They're not like mechanical machines, the same type. By machine, I mean they need fuel, they defecate, they need warmth. If it gets too cold, they die. If it gets too hot, they die. Heat stroke. So we have to engineer the world to take care of those differences. When I say machine, when a doctor looks at your eyes and he says, your retina is letting go, you'll be blind in 3 months. He looks at the degree of damage, which he's been told, if it's this, that will happen. If it's that, this will happen. He isn't born that way. An ophthalmologist isn't born looking in your eyes knowing what's wrong. He's trained to do that. Or educated, if you want to use the word. They don't like the word trained, because who's doing the training? You know, that bothers people. So you can say in the future, people will have much more detail to work with, many more options. Use that kind of language. Instead of saying, we will condition people to be kind. Well, who the hell are you to condition people to be kind? So when they say, who will do the conditioning? You. Well, I'm not qualified. Then somebody that is will. Always point to the guy that raises the question. Who will decide what the electrical output? You. So I don't know anything about it, then you won't decide that. Just do it that way. It's easier. You don't need to argue with people. What if I don't want to live in your cities? It's better for us if you don't. We have more houses available. Sure can. You don't need to fight with people. You know, what if I don't want to eat your health food? You can eat anything you want to eat. But if you get sick, we'll help you. Just this way you can go when you get sick. If you get sick. And if he doesn't get sick, he's stronger than ever. We say, what do you eat? We want to tell people about it. We have no reason to hurt anybody. Do you understand those things? If you don't, you question them. Any questions? Okay. And if a person says, I still don't like the Venus Project, say, please, what is it that you don't like about it? And try to answer them. Sometimes if you say, I used to think the same way you did, that helps. Because people like identification. They don't like you to be superior, have all the answers. What are you, a human encyclopedia? They resent that. Who the hell are you to tell me what to do? They find that certain exposure to the sun produces skin cancer on people that are very white, not people that have a lot of melanin. It doesn't produce as much cancer. So they tell you how much sun you can take. Only through surveys. There's no other way to tell. How come a company guarantees a tire that'll last so long? They run it on a concrete wheel for weeks, and then it's worn out in 4 years. So they guarantee it for 4 years. How do you think they formulate this is guaranteed for 4 years? They must do something to test it. And how in your car it says, have your oil checked every 3 months or whatever it is. How do they know that? By wear and tear of the engine. Always survey. And there are some people that can guess from other machines how long a machine might last. But they couldn't do that 20 years later because there's new metals devised, new lubricants. So your old methods of guesstimating, you know what I mean by guesstimate? Guessing, roughly. You can say a horse lives about 15 years average. Yes, but in the future, a horse might live 35 years. So the way you guess within that culture is not bad. When an American Indian sees a very dark cloud, he might say, bad wind comes soon. They do say things like that. Or the bad wind will kill our people because they haven't been good Indians. I don't know what else. They can add all kinds of crap to it. So we have to be able to filter what we hear to what is referent. And if we hear something that's strange, we ask a person, can you verify that? Or do you know where we can go to verify it? Because we want to keep from being a society that says it'll never fly. The only way to keep that is to keep an open system. So there's no real authority that can stop you from making a new type of food or growing something new. Does that make sense? Because the history of the authority is not very good statistically. Scientists are very bad at predicting the future. Did you know that? Not the future of technology, the future world. And politicians are totally incapable of doing that. Okay, see if you can find segments of this you can use. And I hope it verifies the fact that there's no real control group. There is a monitoring group. Well, do they monitor people? Only health and vision and dentures, and tooth decay. they monitor that. They monitor the strength of your fingernails, but they don't monitor you as a person. They understand that you studied music, art, and poetry. They understand that, but they don't monitor you and say, you shouldn't do this. They don't use the word shouldn't. They say, we used to use this system, now we use this because it works 5 times better. And if you want to call that monitoring, you've got to be very careful of the words you use. When you use the word monitoring, there's somebody looking at you, making a judgment. And you don't want that. You want to verify things as best you can. And if you find our methods of verification are insufficient, bring it up. And we'll show you why we choose that and why we don't. And most Hollywood people that believe in a better world do believe in free will. And they do believe in ethics. That it's within people to be good. All you have to do is bring it out. That we possess a great more knowledge than people think. But if you meditate and clear your mind of all the rubbish, if you were able to do that, clear your mind, you'd fall over. Because you couldn't sit up. If you could stop thinking about everything and just open up, clear your mind of all the rubbish of the system, you fall over. Nobody can do that. Even if you clear your mind, you're thinking of clearing your mind. You know what I mean? So you can't do those things. But if people believe they're doing those things, I feel very good now that I've meditated. Fine. You say, what are you going to do with a guy that says, I sleep very well after I chop their head off? People that made trouble in my land, that try to tell me there's one God. I chopped his head off, I slept very well, because I did something good. To them, that was good. You have to say, what do you do about people that have different concepts of good, because they were misinformed? I said, well, they ought to think it out. Then you have to go back again and show them what think it out means. I'd like you to look up in the dictionary the translation of the word ethics. And because that dictionary is awful place, because it gives people a rigid tendency to believe that those definitions make sense. A lot of them don't make sense at all when you think about it holistically. Looking up ethics, democracy. Look up democracy, you see where it doesn't correspond at all.
You talked about meditation earlier. You said somewhere in a talk you talked about that if people in meditation just go around in a loop that they don't really emerge from.
Yes. Most people do that. They meditate on meditating.
On their navel?
Yeah. They can't meditate on shape memory alloys. They can't meditate on growing more food. Just say a guy who believes in tuning in with nature, say, what's the best food we can eat? First, if he says, I'm a health food analyst and I follow the teachings of Dr. Gordon, well, then he's already contaminated. But can you tell us in your meditation with God, when you talk to God, how to cure cancer or how to stop wars? Ask God. There are people tell me they talk to God every day. And I talk to my deceased brother. You ever hear that guy say? Well, ask the deceased brother, well, everybody is naked in heaven. He said, of course not. Do they wear arrow shirts? What do they wear? Maximum pajamas? Are they naked? And if they wear clothing, is it a white robe? Is it made of fabric or something new? Ask them about that. And ask them if they have to eat anything in heaven. Now that they're in heaven, do you have to cook and eat? Do you defecate? Is your asshole useless? If you don't eat, do you have teeth out there? Ask them all those questions. Yeah, we still eat. Who does the cooking? Oh, some of the angels. Yeah. Where do they get the food from? Oh, there's people working in agriculture that were formerly farmers. See? Or does God make all the food appear? Then you don't need to chew it. It's already pre-chewed. But what the hell? I would ask so many questions if I went to heaven.
That'd be great.
Or hell.
You could kick right out.
Well, there was some
Twain.
play, no, other than Mark Twain. It was a famous president confers with God. Debate. I forgot who it was. But anyways, it's a discussion. It was a famous book, too, at the time, bestseller. That was in the old days, of course, the bestseller. Amongst the free thinkers. Free thinkers were a group of people that read many things outside the box. And the Free Thinkers was a very small organization.
Were they like the humanists a little bit, or?
Yeah, they were for decency and ethics in government, and they believed that little colonies ought to grow their own food and share whatever resources they had. They were part of the way there. They were good people, and they didn't like the economy. Some of them were socialists, some were communists, with modified forms of communism. Some were Trotskyites and some were Leninists, some were Stalinists. They didn't like each other.
So it was about the 20s, 30s?
Yeah, all that time. There was so many different religions, new religions too.